You know that feeling when a story grabs you so hard you forget to blink? Yeah, that's why we're here. This channel is for people who are hopelessly and helplessly addicted to a good story. Welcome to your new addiction. This is Story Junkie. And trust me, you're going to want to stay. Let me tell you what success looks like from the inside of a family that resents it. It looks like a holiday table set in your honor and a folder of forged documents slid across the china. It looks like a welcome banner that is really a trapdoor. It looks like your brother's easy smile and your mother's perfect posture and your father's handshake, always a handshake, never a hug. And it feels, if you are not careful, almost like love. I was not careful enough. But my sister Esther was, and that made all the difference. The drive up to Zenith Estate should have taken 40 minutes. It took 2.5 hours. First, there was the accident on the I-78, a jackknife truck spilling its load of industrial pipes across 3 lanes, turning the highway into a parking lot, while helicopters circled overhead like vultures. Then my GPS, the one Z had updated just last week, decided to reroute me through a county road that no longer existed, having been washed out in last spring's floods. I ended up navigating by the compass on my dashboard through roads I hadn't driven since I was 17, past cornfields gone brown, and past the old Hensley barn that had half collapsed since I last saw it. Then, because the universe apparently had a quota to fill, the rain started. Not a gentle November rain either, or the kind that patters politely against your windshield and makes you feel cozy. This was the kind that turns roads into rivers and makes you wonder, briefly and seriously, if you made a wrong turn into the end times. By the time I turned into the long gravel driveway of my parents' estate, my hands were white on the steering wheel, my blouse was wrinkled from 4 hours of sitting, and I had missed 3 calls from Z. I called him back before stepping out of the car. "You there yet?" His voice was warm and immediate, the way it always was. Z's voice could talk you down from a ledge. "Just pulled in. Z, I have a bad feeling about this." There was a pause. Not the pause of a man who thinks you're being dramatic. The pause of a man who shares your concern, but doesn't want to say so before you walk into a lion's den. "You'll be okay," he said. "Call me after dinner. Actually, call me if anything feels uncomfortable, even slightly." "I will." "I love you. Don't let them make you small." I sat in the car for another moment after I hung up, rain hammering the roof, looking at the house. Zenith Estate. 5 acres, 6 bedrooms, a wraparound porch, and a reputation in the county that my father had spent 40 years curating. From the outside, it looked exactly like it always had. Grand, imposing, the kind of house that tells you everyone inside has opinions about you before you even knock. Every window was lit, smoke curled from 2 chimneys. A banner had been strung between the porch columns. "Welcome home, Belinda." Something about that banner made my stomach turn. My mother had never hung a welcome banner for me in my life. Not when I graduated college with honors, not when I got my first book deal, not when my company cleared its first $1 million in revenue. But here it was, swaying in the November rain, white letters on burgundy fabric, and something about it felt less like a welcome and more like a trap being spring-loaded. I grabbed my overnight bag, opened the door, and walked into the rain. My name is Belinda Adaisy Zenith Walsh, and I am, according to the financial press, something of a success story. I built my company, Bellex Creative, a brand strategy and content licensing firm, from a laptop in a 1-bedroom apartment when I was 23. By 26, I had 12 clients and a small office in Midtown. By 28, we had acquired a boutique media company and signed licensing deals with 3 Fortune 500 brands. Last year, at 29, Forbes ran a half-page feature. My mother cut it out and showed it to her church friends, but didn't call me to say she'd seen it. That is my family in one image. Proud enough to display me, not enough to tell me. My father Ron is a man who built his own empire, Zenith Agricultural Holdings, a land management and agribusiness company that sprawled across 4 counties. For 30 years, he was formidable. Then came a series of bad investments in the mid-2010s, a drought that devastated 2 of his key properties, a lawsuit from a former business partner that settled expensively and quietly, and a son, my brother Zach, who joined the company and ran 2 divisions into the ground within 18 months. By the time I was making real money, Zenith Holdings was hemorrhaging. My mother Lydia ran the household and the family's social reputation the way generals run campaigns, with intelligence, ruthlessness, and absolutely no tolerance for dissent. She also controlled the family trust, a legacy instrument set up by my paternal grandfather that, depending on certain conditions, could be redirected among heirs. My sister Maria, 34, had married into a family that seemed wealthy until it turned out to be leveraged to the eyebrows. She'd come back to the estate 2 years ago with her 2 children and a tight smile that never quite reached her eyes. My brother Zach, 32, had the charm of a salesman and the discipline of a golden retriever. He had borrowed money from 3 family members, including me, and repaid none of it. And then there was Esther. 26 years old, the youngest of us, currently finishing her master's in environmental law at Georgetown. Esther was the only one in the family who had ever called me on my birthday unprompted. The only one who had read my book. The only one who had ever said, without needing anything from me in return, "I'm proud of you, Belle." I had spoken to Esther 2 nights before Thanksgiving. "Come," she'd said, "I'll be there. I need you to come." "Why? What's happening?" A hesitation. "Just come, and be careful." I should have pushed harder. I should have asked more questions, but I had told myself for the 100th time in 30 years that family was family, and Thanksgiving was Thanksgiving, and perhaps this time would be different. It wasn't different. It was so much worse. My mother met me at the door with a hug that lasted exactly the right amount of time, long enough to seem warm, short enough to signal that warmth had limits. "You look thin," she said, which was her way of saying hello. "Hi, Mom." "Your father's in the study. Don't go in yet, he's on a call. Zach and Maria are in the sitting room. Come, I've made your grandmother's sweet potato recipe." The house smelled extraordinary. I'll give my mother that. Whatever else she was, Lydia Zenith could cook with a ferocity that bordered on spiritual. The smell of roasting turkey and sage and caramelized yams wrapped around me like something almost safe. I found Esther in the kitchen, allegedly helping, but actually sitting on the counter eating cheese. Her face when she saw me was relief and something else. "You came," she said. "You said to come." I hugged her hard. She held on a little longer than usual. "Esther, what's going on?" She glanced at the kitchen door. There were voices in the hallway, Maria's precise carrying laugh and Zach's low rumble. "Not here," she said quietly. "After dinner. Stay close to me." "You're scaring me." "Good," she said. "Stay scared, just don't show it." Dinner began at 6. The table was set beautifully, my mother's best china, the crystal glasses that only came out for occasions, a centerpiece of dried autumn flowers and candles. My father sat at the head, Ron Zenith, 63 years old, a big man gone slightly soft but still carrying himself like a man who expects rooms to rearrange themselves around him. He shook my hand. He always shook my hand. He never hugged. "Belinda, good of you to make it." "Good to be here, Dad." Maria was already seated, her 2 children dispatched to the kitchen table with tablets and turkey slices. She was wearing a new dress that I suspected she couldn't afford, her hair done professionally, her smile calibrated to a frequency I recognized: performance. Maria was performing tonight. The question was, for whose benefit? Zach was already on his 2nd drink, which was not unusual. He grinned at me with that easy, infuriating charm, the kind that had gotten him out of accountability his entire life. "Big sister," he said. Forbes magazine. Look at you. Hi, Zach. You look expensive. Thank you. I meant it as a critique, he said and laughed. Esther sat next to me. Under the table, she pressed her knee briefly against mine. I'm here. The first hour was almost normal. My father asked about Belks. I answered carefully, sharing what felt safe. The new licensing division, the expansion plans, the team we'd built. My mother asked if Z was coming. I said he was spending Thanksgiving with his own family this year, that we'd seen them last week. Pity, my mother said, in the tone she used when she didn't find something a pity at all. Then my father cleared his throat, set down his wine, and the temperature in the room changed. It was subtle. Maria stopped eating. Zach stopped smiling. My mother's posture, already perfect, became somehow more perfect, rigid, prepared. Only Esther next to me went very still in the way prey animals go still when they sense a change in the air. Belinda, my father said, there's something we want to discuss as a family. Of course, I said. And so it began. My brother produced a folder. That was the first thing that told me this was organized. Zach, who lost his car keys twice a week, had a folder. It was a slim cream-colored folder, and he slid it across the table to me with the deliberate casualness of a man who has rehearsed the gesture. Inside were financial documents, specifically bank transfer records, investment filings, and 3 pages of what appeared to be communications, emails time-stamped and formatted, between someone using my company's domain and an offshore account registered in the Cayman Islands. I looked at them. I looked at them for a long time. What is this? I said. We think, my father said slowly, as if he were being very careful and very fair, that you owe this family an explanation. About what, specifically? The Zenith Trust, my mother said. Grandpa's trust. Belinda, there have been withdrawals. My stomach dropped. Someone, Maria said, her voice precise as a scalpel, with access to the trust's secondary signatory line, which you have, has been moving money, transferring it in small amounts to avoid triggering oversight. 43 transfers over 18 months. She paused. $312,000. The number landed like a punch in the gut. I haven't touched that trust, I said. The records suggest otherwise, my father said. Then the records are wrong or fabricated. Zach laughed, not his usual easy laugh. Fabricated, right. Belinda, we're your family. We didn't want to believe it either, but the evidence... What evidence? Those emails. Let me see the headers on those emails. Let me see the metadata. Those could have been generated in an afternoon, Zach, and you know it. Why would we do that? Maria asked. I looked at her practiced expression of wounded dignity, at the new dress, at my brother's uncharacteristic preparedness, at my father's performance of reluctance, at my mother, seated at the other end of the table, hands folded, watching me with the expression of a woman waiting for a verdict she's already written. And then it got worse. My father reached into his jacket and produced his phone. He turned it to face me. It was a screenshot of a news article. The headline read, Bellex Creative under investigation, SEC inquiry launched into brand licensing firm's offshore holdings. Published 3 hours ago. We didn't plant this, my father said quietly. It went public this afternoon. Belinda, if there's something you need to tell us. I need to make a phone call, I said. We're in the middle of dinner, my mother said. Mom. My voice came out harder than I intended. Someone has apparently filed a false SEC report, fabricated financial documents, and linked my company to offshore accounts I have never heard of. I need to make a phone call. The room was silent. Use the study, Esther said, the first thing she'd said since it started. I called Z first. He answered in 2 rings. I told him what the family had just confronted me with. There was a silence that told me he was already moving, already pulling up his laptop, already thinking 3 steps ahead. Z was not just my husband. He was also, as it happened, a corporate attorney. It was not a coincidence that my family had chosen a holiday weekend to do this. Courts were closed. Law offices were minimally staffed. The news cycle on a Thanksgiving Thursday was slow enough that a story could spread without the usual interference. "Don't sign anything," he said immediately. "Don't acknowledge anything in writing. Don't respond to the article, not to anyone. Text, email, nothing." "Z, they've fabricated—" "I know, I believe you, but Belle, listen. If the SEC filing is real, if someone actually submitted a complaint, this is not just a family argument. This is a federal matter. I'm calling Warren tonight." Warren Bailey was our securities attorney. He was also, thankfully, the kind of man who answered his phone on Thanksgiving. "The trust withdrawals," I said. "The documents look convincing. Whoever did this had access to your signatory information and enough technical skill to generate convincing forgeries." Belle. A pause. "Is there anyone in the family with that kind of access? Any time you might have left a device unattended? Signed anything without reading it fully?" I thought. I hated that I had to think. 6 months ago, I'd been at the estate for my father's birthday. I'd left my laptop in the study while I helped my mother in the kitchen. I was in the kitchen for 2 hours, and my email was open. My company accounts were linked. Zach had been in the study. I told Z. He was quiet, then said, "I'm coming there." "It's Thanksgiving." "I'm coming there. Don't go back to that table without me. And Belle, find Esther." I found Esther in the hallway, leaning against the wall outside the study with her arms folded, her face tight with something she'd been holding for a while. "How long have you known?" I asked. 3 weeks, she said. I overheard them, Mom and Zach in the kitchen talking about the accounts, about making it look like Belinda. I didn't have specifics. I didn't know about the SEC filing. I think that's something Zach added independently. She pressed her lips together. "I've been documenting everything I hear, everything I remember. I wrote it down the same night, time-stamped. It's in my email." I stared at my little sister, 26 years old, standing in the hallway of our parents' house on Thanksgiving, having spent 3 weeks carrying this alone, waiting for me. "Why didn't you call me immediately?" "Because I needed to be at the table when it happened," she said. "I needed to be a witness. A present, sober, credible witness who can testify that the family had a predetermined plan." She met my eyes. "I want them to go down for this, Belle. Not just embarrassed, down." I had underestimated my younger sister for 26 years. I would not make that mistake again. "Z's coming," I said. She nodded. "Good. Tell him I have a recording." "A recording?" I put my phone on record when I went back to the table to get my wine glass. "When you were in the study making calls." She pulled her phone out of her pocket. "My father just said, and I quote, 'Once this gets into the press properly, the trust board will suspend her access, and we can petition for reallocation of her share. The SEC thing should freeze Bellix's accounts long enough that she can't fight back financially.'" The world went very quiet. Then it got loud again. A different kind of loud, the kind that sounds like 30 years of swallowed injuries. "Send that to Z," I said. "Send it to yourself, to the cloud, to 3 different email addresses, right now." "Already did," Esther said. "This morning when I woke up, I sent it to my Georgetown law professor too, with context for safekeeping." She had thought of everything. I pulled her into a hug so hard she made a small sound of surprise. And then she hugged me back, her arms tight around my shoulders. And we stood in the hallway of Zenith Estate while the candles burned down on the Thanksgiving table. And for the first time that evening, I felt something other than fear. I felt the specific clarifying rage of a woman who has decided to stop being the victim in a story. When I walked back into the dining room, I was a different person than the one who had left it. "Sit down, Belinda," my father said. "We need to—" "Actually, Dad, I'll stand." I stood at my end of the table. My mother's eyes narrowed fractionally. "I've spoken with my husband, who is, as you may recall, a corporate attorney. He's on his way. I've also made contact with our Securities Counsel, who is reviewing the SEC filing tonight. And I want you all to understand something very clearly." "Belinda," my mother started, "the emails in that folder are forgeries. The transfer records are fabricated, and the SEC complaint was filed using information that was stolen from my laptop, which was left unattended in this house 6 months ago." I looked directly at Zach. He looked away first. "You made one very significant miscalculation." Silence. "You forgot about Esther." Maria's head turned sharply. Esther, who was standing at my side, met her sister's gaze with the steady, unbothered calm of someone who has already filed her testimony and has nothing left to perform. "She's been here 3 weeks," I continued. "She heard your planning sessions. She has a recording of Dad describing the strategy to freeze my company accounts and petition for trust reallocation." I paused. "Would you like me to play it at the table? Or shall we wait for the attorneys?" My father's face had gone the particular grey of a man whose certainty has just been removed. My mother spoke. Her voice was controlled, but I could hear the calculation running underneath it, adjusting, revising. "Belinda, whatever you think you heard, or think Esther heard." "We don't think anything, Mom. We have documentation, time-stamped written notes, an audio recording, and we have the original metadata from those forged emails, which any forensic accountant worth their fees will be able to unravel within 48 hours. I finally sat down. "So here is what's going to happen tonight. We're going to eat the rest of this dinner. We're going to be civil, and tomorrow morning, when my husband arrives and our attorneys have reviewed everything, we're going to have a very different conversation than the one you planned." Zach started to speak. "Don't," Esther said quietly from beside me. Just that one word. He closed his mouth. Z arrived at 11 that night. He came with a carry-on bag, his laptop, and the expression of a man in whom courtesy had been replaced temporarily by purpose. He kissed me and held my face for a moment, looked at me carefully the way he always did when he was checking that I was actually okay, and then he sat down at my parents' kitchen table with Warren Bailey on speakerphone and began to work. I sat across from him and watched my husband do what he did best. "The SEC filing is real," Warren said through the phone, his voice stripped of the holiday warmth I usually heard in it. "Filed yesterday evening at 6:47 p.m. Anonymous complaint, but the documentation attached, the account records, the email chains, those are what I'm looking at right now." A pause. "They're good forgeries. Whoever did this had professional help or significant technical resources." "Or a disgruntled former employee," Z said, glancing at me. I thought immediately of Paul Madison, our former CFO. I'd let him go 8 months ago for persistent irregularities in his expense reports, small things, but accumulating. He'd been angry. He had also, I now recalled, met with Zach twice for lunch in the months before his termination, which I had noted at the time as a curiosity and filed away. I told Z. I watched him write it down without expression. "That's a thread," he said. "Warren, are you logging that?" "Logging it," Warren said. Esther, who had been sitting quietly at the end of the table with her phone and a notepad, looked up. "Madison met with Zach at Carver's Grill in September and again in October. I remember because Zach mentioned running into a friend in finance at both lunches, and it seemed odd. Zach doesn't really have friends in finance. I thought it was strange at the time." Z looked at her with something like professional admiration. "You have a good memory." "I have a good notes habit," she said, "and I don't trust easy." By midnight, we had the beginning of a counterfiling. By 1 in the morning, Z had called 2 more attorneys, a forensic accountant partner from his firm's white-collar division, and a specialist in civil fraud litigation. By 2, we had a preliminary framework for what this was going to look like. My family, in the meantime, had gone to bed. My mother had knocked on the kitchen door at midnight, looked at the table full of notes and laptops and the speakerphone still running, and withdrawn without a word. My father had not appeared at all. Zach, I suspected, was in his room making phone calls of his own, but whatever plan he was running was about to encounter the fundamental problem of having underestimated the opposition. I was still awake at 3. Esther was asleep on the kitchen couch, her phone clutched to her chest, her breathing deep and even. Z was working. The house was quiet except for the rain still going, drumming on the old roof of Zenith Estate. I looked around the kitchen, at the copper pots my mother had collected over 40 years, at the corkboard by the phone with its faded family photos, Zach's graduation, Maria's wedding, a Christmas from 2009 where we all looked almost happy. A school photo of me at 8 years old with my crooked smile and a missing tooth. I had loved this house once, had believed it meant something. I had spent years chasing the version of this family that existed in my 8-year-old imagination, the one that would eventually see me, recognize me, love me without the asterisks. The family had looked at my success and seen a resource to mine. They had looked at my trust and seen a mechanism to exploit. They had looked at their own daughter and seen an obstacle wearing a familiar face. I was finished, I realized. I wasn't finished with the grief. I suspected the grief would take a long time to work through properly. I was finished with the project of trying to earn their recognition. With the returning year after year to a table that was set for my diminishment. I was 30 years old. I had built something real. I had a husband who had driven through the night on Thanksgiving, and I had a sister asleep on a couch who had spent 3 weeks gathering evidence so that the truth would have a witness. That was the family I had. The rest of it could burn. Everything moved quickly after that, and not without turbulence. 3 days after Thanksgiving, the SEC received a counter-submission from Warren's office detailing the forensic evidence of forgery, metadata inconsistencies in the email headers, IP address traces that placed the originating account at a location linked to Paul Madison, and a chain of digital breadcrumbs that an investigator with Z's firm had begun to unravel with impressive speed. The forgeries, it turned out, were good but not perfect. Whoever had commissioned them had been operating on a timeline and a budget, and they'd cut corners that a trained forensic accountant could find in 72 hours of focused work. If you made it this far, you already know you're a story junkie. Hit like, subscribe, turn on notifications, and let's feed that addiction together. A new story is always waiting for you here. Madison had a lawyer by then. His lawyer had the look of a man being paid inadequately to defend a client who was clearly, comprehensively, in the wrong. Within a week, Madison had agreed to cooperate with investigators in exchange for reduced liability. He gave them everything, the meetings with Zach, the payments, insulting in their modesty, as though my legacy were worth $11,000, the technical assistance he'd provided in fabricating the transfer records. The paper trail led back to Zenith. I didn't feel triumph when I heard this. I felt something flat and sorrowful. The trust board, once presented with the evidence of fraud, moved quickly to investigate my family's unauthorized manipulation of trust documents, because Madison's package also included communications showing that Zach had pressured a secondary trust administrator to preposition the reallocation petition. The administrator resigned. Zach retained a lawyer. My father made 2 calls to people who had long since stopped returning his calls, and my mother, Lydia Zenith, who had managed the family's reputation like a military operation for 4 decades, went very quiet in a way that I was told was unlike her. Maria tried to call me twice. I let it go to voicemail. The messages were calculated exercises in plausible deniability. She hadn't known the full extent. She'd had concerns herself. She hoped we could talk. I forwarded them to our attorney without listening to the second one twice. The SEC cleared Bell X Creative of any wrongdoing 6 weeks after the initial complaint. issuing a statement that the filing had been based on fabricated documentation. Our PR team handled the press carefully, not triumphantly. The facts were the facts, and the facts were on our side. The real consequence, though, the one I hadn't anticipated, was what happened to Zenith Holdings. When the fraud investigation became partially public, these things never stay fully contained. It emerged that the trust manipulation wasn't the only irregularity in the family's financial history. Creditors who had been patient grew less patient. A refinancing deal my father had been working on collapsed within a week of the first press report. 2 board members of Zenith Holdings resigned. Zach, who had nominally been COO of a subsidiary, was suspended pending the internal investigation. Zenith Estate, the house, the 5 acres, the copper pots and the corkboard, and my crooked 8-year-old smile, went to the bank within the year. Not because of anything I did, because the empire had been failing long before I arrived that Thanksgiving, and the scheme they'd built to save it had only accelerated its ruin. Murphy's Law, I thought when I heard. Anything that can go wrong. They had aimed it at me, it had curved, as ruin tends to do, and found them instead. Esther got her master's degree the following spring. I flew to Washington for her graduation, just me and Z, who brought flowers that were aggressively oversized and made Esther laugh so hard she nearly dropped her diploma. We took her to dinner at a restaurant with cloth napkins and a wine list, and I watched my little sister sit back in her chair with the ease of someone who has done a difficult thing and knows it. "What are you going to do now?" I asked her. "Environmental litigation," she said, "specific focus on land rights and corporate accountability." She swirled her wine with the casual authority of a woman who has decided what she stands for. "I've had some recent experience with corporate accountability." "Recent experience?" Z repeated. "Adjacent to," she said and smiled. "I want to offer you something," I said, "and I want you to hear it properly, not as charity." She looked at me carefully. "Bellex is expanding our legal and compliance division. We're building an in-house ethics and governance team, not just for us, but as a consultancy arm for other firms. I want someone to lead it who is brilliant and rigorous and constitutionally incapable of being bought." I held her gaze. "The job is yours if you want it. It pays well, the work is real, and you would be reporting directly to me." Esther was quiet for a long moment. "Would I have actual authority?" she asked. "Total authority within your division. And if I see something wrong, I can say so, even if it's inconvenient. Especially if it's inconvenient. That's the whole point of you." She looked at Z. "And you're okay with her hiring her sister?" Z spread his hands. The sister in question kept her head, gathered evidence, secured a recording, documented witness testimony, and arguably saved the company. I'd hire her myself if she'd take my calls. Esther picked up her wine glass. "I'll think about it," she said. Then after a moment, "Yes. My answer is yes." We clinked glasses. Outside the restaurant window, Washington, D.C. was lit and moving. Strangers going about their own complicated lives, carrying their own histories. Inside, the 3 of us sat in the warm, ordinary miracle of people who have come through something difficult and chosen what to carry forward. I still think about that Thanksgiving sometimes. Not with the raw, disorienting pain I felt in the months immediately after, but the kind that wakes you at 3 a.m. with the specific cruelty of remembered faces across a candlelit table. People who share your blood having decided that what you built was worth more to them dismantled than it was whole. That pain has changed shape. It has become something I can hold at a slight distance, examine, set down again. What I think about most is the banner. "Welcome home, Belinda." It had been intended as stagecraft, a prop in a performance designed to make me feel safe enough to be ambushed. And in the weeks after, I'd revisited it with anger, with the particular bitterness of someone who recognizes that every warm gesture in a long history may have been instrumentalized. that my parents' occasional pride, my siblings' occasional warmth, may have all been conditional in ways I hadn't permitted myself to see. But here is what I've come to understand. A welcome that is manufactured is still, paradoxically, a confession. My family hung that banner because they needed me to believe I was welcome. They needed me present, engaged, emotionally available for the performance, and the fact that they needed to manufacture it told me everything I hadn't been ready to know for 30 years. That the genuine welcome had never been there. That I had spent decades seeking warmth at a source that was, structurally, unable to provide it. My father and I haven't spoken since the investigation concluded. My mother sent a card at Christmas, hand-addressed with no return address, a store-bought sentiment about family and forgiveness that she had signed with her full name, Lydia Ann Zenith, as though formality could substitute for accountability. I read it once, put it on my desk, and eventually threw it away. It wasn't thrown away in anger. I was done in the quiet, decisive way you dispose of things that no longer serve a purpose. Zach is in the middle of a civil proceeding. His attorney is negotiating. I leave that to Warren and feel nothing particularly strong about its outcome. Whatever the legal consequence is, it will be proportionate to something. And that is the most I can ask of justice in a world that doesn't promise it. Maria sent a long email. It was eloquent, in the way Maria was always eloquent, and entirely focused on explaining how her own culpability was overstated. I wrote back a single sentence. I hope you find a way to be honest with yourself. She didn't reply. The estate itself was purchased at auction by a property development company that plans to convert it into an events venue. The corkboard, I assume, is gone. The copper pots may have survived. Someone would have taken them for their quality, if nothing else. The oak in the front yard is still standing. I've seen it in the listing photos. Some things outlast the stories told in their shade. Bellex cleared $30 million in revenue last fiscal year. I'm not writing that to gloat, but because it matters as a data point in a specific argument I have been making to myself for several years. The argument that what I built was real, that it was mine, that no amount of sabotage or bad faith or manufactured evidence could hollow it out. The argument that I was right to keep going in my one-bedroom apartment at 23, in the early years when my family's silence about my work felt like a verdict, when I used to call home and report milestones into a politeness so polished it reflected nothing back. It was real. I was right. Esther runs our governance and ethics division with a precision that sometimes makes the rest of the senior team slightly nervous, which I consider a feature rather than a bug. She has a corner office and a team of 4 and a reputation in our industry for being the person you call when something is going sideways and you want someone who won't flinch. She comes to Sunday dinner at our house approximately 3 Sundays out of 4, and she and Z argue cheerfully about environmental regulation in a way that has become one of my favorite sounds. This is the family I chose. This is the table I set. It has no banners. We know who is welcome here. Last November, a year after Thanksgiving at Zenith, Z made dinner. It was just the 3 of us. Me, him, Esther. He made a turkey that was slightly overcooked, which he refused to acknowledge, and sweet potatoes that were genuinely outstanding, and a gravy that was more optimistic than successful. We ate at our kitchen table, our own table, in our own home, with the lights low and music playing, and no performance required of anyone. Esther raised her glass at some point. She didn't make a speech. She wasn't one for speeches. She just said, 2 next year and the one after that. Outside November was doing what November does, pressing dark and cold against the windows, the year beginning its long lean toward ending. Inside was warmth and food, the specific, unremarkable holiness of people who have chosen each other and show up, again and again, without condition. I have thought often about what it costs to be the kind of person who returns, year after year, to a place that diminishes you, who sets aside the evidence of her own experience in the hope that this time will be different. I did it for 30 years. I understand now that it was not loyalty or love that kept me returning. It was hope. A particular flavor of hope that is indistinguishable from the outside, from stubbornness. The hope that the people who were supposed to love you first will eventually learn how. Some of them don't. Some families are not homes. Some tables are set to take from you rather than feed you. And the bravest thing you can do is recognize it, stand up, and walk out into the rain toward the life that is actually yours. You cannot make a fire from stone. What you can do is walk away from the stone and find wood elsewhere. I walked out, I got wet, I found my way, and I have never been more at home.